Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where generally we explore the digital revolution that's taking place today, but these days we're also exploring the revolution that's come across all of our lives, how we live, how we work, how we're trying to move forward, and what we're going to see over the next few months as things change back somewhat, at least, to like they've been before. So we are really delighted, as always, to have one of our regular digital all-star guest, Tony Uphoff, who's the CEO of Thomas, which is the parent company of ThomasNet. Tony, over the last few years, has led Thomas through its own digital transformation and now provides a data platform connecting buyers and sellers in the industrial markets. Tony's got a storied career in media. He's been a blogger. They're doing their own podcasts now, got some great insights into what's going on in the industrial markets and the manufacturing markets. Hey, Tony, great to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Bob. Great to see you and hear your voice, my friend.
Thanks. And I hope everybody with you and your crew at home and at work, everybody's doing okay.
All good. And I hope the same for you and your family, Bob. Thanks.
Very much, Tony. So crazy times that we're in here. And I know you've got some interesting things that have gone on at Thomas, and you've had a chance over some previous episodes to mention a little bit, but given this, we toss around the word unprecedented. This is unprecedented. So tell us a little bit about what the last month or so has been like for your company and some of the pretty wild things you're doing.
Yeah, it is crazy, Bob. And I think the last time we talked, I think I referenced, I've maybe used the term unprecedented half a dozen times over the last 20 years. I now use it half a dozen times every hour. It's just an amazing time. Like many companies, we made the decision coming into the middle of March. We actually made it on Thursday, the 12th, to make a full pivot to all remote work for about 350 employees spread across two locations. One, the largest one, is in New York City, and then out in Horsham, Pennsylvania, a couple hours outside of New York City. And as I joked with you before we got going, they should fire my ass if, as the CEO of a data platform and internet company, I couldn't do this. So it's one thing, though, to model it out, and another thing to actually do it and see it happen. And I have to tell you, I'll tell you just a couple of interesting experiences from it. The first step was how smoothly it went. I kind of held my breath for 24 to 48 hours, but literally from every function of the business, I was just thrilled with how prepared we were to do something like this, and not because we were prepared to go remote. I think a lot of it was the experience we've had as a technology-centric company that put us in the position where we could make a move like this. And boy, you don't know. The example I gave to somebody was there's a trick that a lot of personal trainers do, and they'll train you for, let's say, a year, and then they'll say something casual like, "Hey, Bob, why don't we just set the iPhone timer here for 5 minutes? Let's just see how many push-ups you can do in 5 minutes." And oh, by the way, your goal is to do 100 in 5 minutes. And so the first time this happens to you, literally in your brain, you start laughing internally, thinking this person's out of their mind, and you probably hit 80 or 90. You think, holy smokes! And then the next time you try it, you hit 100, and then maybe you even go over 100. Well, it's not that on that moment in time you could do 100 push-ups in 5 minutes. It's the work you put in over the year and a half before that. That's really the trick to it. And so I was thrilled that the work we'd put in put us in a good position. I was sharing with you and your producer before we went on, it's just a great anecdote. We have an executive committee that's made up of the two grandsons of the original founder of our company, Harvey Mark Thomas, 122 years ago. And these two folks that had our exec committee are probably in their late 70s. And we're on doing what you and I are doing right now. We're sharing the screen back and forth. We're on a video call. And my colleague, our CFO, Mitch Piper, took a still picture snapshot of it and sent it to me. And I'm just going to treasure this because it said to me, here's multiple generations, but it was just intuitive. And I thought how proud their grandfather would be with the legacy of his company. And that, using blazing modern technology today, we're not only able to make a transition like this, but to a certain extent, I think we're thriving through an environment like this. So it's really been remarkable.
Tony, the we've had some interesting conversations recently. A guy yesterday was talking about resiliency and readiness, and the combination of those, the power of culture and so on like that. So, with ThomasNet, you've got this fantastic data platform, but I think one of the things that's come up recently that you've developed here as well was something you've called the Coronavirus Resource Hub. Tell us a little bit about that and what's been the response.
Shortly after, well, let me back up to go forward. So this was actually technically before we moved to remote work. We started to see late fourth quarter, early first quarter, what we consider to be asymmetric sourcing on the platform. And you and I have touched on this before, Bob. We get now upwards of 80,000 sourcing sessions per day. So we could see the sourcing sessions lift, but they were very acutely focused around what the world now knows of as PPE, personal protection equipment. But it was not just masks, it was everything down the long tail, including respirators. And a lot of it was coming out of China. Now, we know enough about sourcing that we know that 80+% of most PPE, particularly things like hospital gowns, masks, and gloves, come out of a region in China that's very close to Wuhan. So as we started to hear about the coronavirus, we realized, okay, that supply chain has clearly been disrupted, but then we could see it moving around. So we pretty quickly realized the PPE supply chain is going to be devastated. And it is a supply chain that has, through history, let me define history as the last 50 years, pretty predictable. It doesn't move, it doesn't swing by 20, 30% in demand in any given point in time. And so we realized pretty fast that there was going to be a real problem here. So one of the things that we did, and this was then now shortly after we went to remote work, I get a call on Friday night from our chief technology officer. And he said, hey, do you have time for a quick video call with our chief designer? And I said, yeah, sure. We get on the call. And the designer had mocked up a coronavirus resource hub. And the vision was, hey, let's not just showcase the PPE suppliers that are already on the platform. We had thousands of them. Let's actually rally the manufacturing community, of which we were getting hundreds, if not thousands of companies reaching out saying, I could dedicate a shift to this. I could dedicate capacity to produce PPE, but I'm not known as a PPE supplier. So we stood up this resource hub to help companies understand how to manage through this pandemic, but also we put out a call for entries, if you will. And to date, Bob, we've had nearly 1,800 companies register. We've validated them. We have created a COVID-19 response supplier badge that's both in the filtering system that a hospital or an organization doing this sourcing for critical equipment could have access to, and then also on the supplier profile. And we have just so many stories that just bring tears to your eyes of these companies. We have 4 or 5 companies that said, hey, I was going to have to shut down for the foreseeable future, and I can keep my shifts running because you guys allowed me to produce PPE equipment and connect me with people that were sourcing. We've heard from hospitals and organizations and city and state governments and all kinds of institutions that have found incremental suppliers and supply that way. So that was one of those just moments where I think 2 things came together there. One was, again, I touch on this idea of all the work we've put in over the last several years. We were able to stand up that resource hub, but also integrate it into the daily sourcing opportunity that you can use on ThomasNet. We did it in 48 hours, Bob. And honest to God, when I joined the company 3 years ago, if you had told me, right, no way.
Yeah. Tony, what's wild about this? You and I have known each other for a while, and I think sometimes, right, what you said at the beginning, entirely true. The head of a data platform, the CEO of a data platform company, if you couldn't make this move pretty quick, fire your ass. And you look at it another way, and I think in some ways what we are seeing, and I'm sorry if I'm going to embarrass you here on video, I don't mean to, but we're seeing
Wouldn't be the first time, unfortunately.
We're seeing and teams rise to things. I don't mean that I don't think they thought were possible, but that were unexpected. I think this is, for all the misery and the agony, the heartbreak and the tragedy that's occurred over the last several weeks, what we're seeing in many parts of the society, the economy, captured, I think, partly by what you're talking about, 4 or 5 companies, say it was one, let alone 5, these companies, and there's people in there, we hear about 22 million Americans out of work.
Yeah.
And you and your team, I think, are representative of the very best of what's going on in the world of business here. Adaptation, taking full opportunities of things, being creative, being somewhat fearless and jumping into opportunities, making the future what it could be, instead of, sitting back and perhaps somewhat understandably saying, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm a trapped, I'm a victim here. It's got to be awfully exhilarating for you and the team.
It is, Bob, and I appreciate you noting it. I think, my colleague Rita Lieberman, who helps us with the prep for these podcasts, was commenting before we got going that, that first day was kind of, a little bit, anxiety producing, and then it was exhilarating, because I think what you saw was everybody bought in. Nobody held back. Nobody, no function of the company. And then literally, I'm just blown away by everybody, not only pulling their weight, but more. And I think what it also did, which I don't know how to explain, Bob, but I put it into a long list of under a category I call positive forcing functions. There's an MBA mumbo jumbo term if I've ever come up with one. But you know what I mean by that. I think this idea of, in a positive way, take action, do something, take some action here. And I think what it did for us, and I would turn to the Resource Hub as a good example of that, that was a project that probably a year before that would have taken us probably 2-3 months of discussion, another 2-3 months of planning. Then you get it into the roadmap, and honest to God, that probably would have been a 9 to 10 month, and we would have been thrilled, thinking, hey, look at us, we did that in 9 to 10 months. The fact that we did it, in basically the equivalent of 2 days with no 2 people in the same room, I think what it did is it proved to every person in this company what we can actually do. And, Bob, our story's been repeated, think how many times this is happening across the globe right now. I've talked to you many times about the remarkable resiliency and innovation in American manufacturing. And the fact that you're seeing so many of them pivot and say, I'll create capacity to serve the need right now. I will shift my business around. I will do these different things to heed the call. I think is just an example of so many companies. And, you and I have talked about the big tech companies that are doing some remarkable things, but also these smaller and medium-sized companies. I think this is a moment of truth for a lot of these companies.
Yeah. And I think then in some ways, Tony, what, we had chatted a little bit about beforehand, there will be, as there always is in life and business, there's going to be winners and losers. And that not that the people who are not winners are, capital L losers. I don't mean that, but it's just, these are awfully hard times that people are going through now. And if a company is able to have that sort of breakthrough that you've described at Thomas and at other companies, in the way you see, car companies making ventilators and underwear companies making masks and gowns and those sorts of things. Well, there's a million reasons, right? You go up and down the line. We can't do this. This is too hard. What about afterward? How will we should, blah, blah, blah. What's all that stuff mean? But there's a fearlessness and a courage and a creativity, I think, was wrapped up. And look at that thing you've talked about there, not just what you're able to do, but able to do it not in 9 months, but in, a handful of days. It's remarkable. So I just think there's a chance over the next few months for a real renaissance, a further revolution and acceleration of what we had come to think of somewhat as digital transformation. And maybe that's now too narrow a term, but it's a transformation of which digital's a part. But you've just described a lot of stuff that's digital plus.
Yeah. I think, Bob, look, you and I have shared the remarkable insights from our mutual friend and colleague, Sean Amirati, of he calls it the Disney Plus moment, where suddenly here's a company that's really struggled to understand digital transformation. And then what appeared to be out of nowhere, they create a $6 billion a year digital streaming revenue stream. And I think that for many companies, and I'd like to think we would be in this category. This crisis happened at a time where we'd gone over in a positive way the other side of digital transformation to the whatever digital transformation leads to. Is that more agility? Is that more technical resiliency? Is that more agility? You know, there's so many different things that could come from that. Or does it give you optionality, Bob, in business models and other things? Because to stand up something new or to try something new is not as expensive or as labor intensive as perhaps it used to be. And I think a lot about, you know, as a steward of this remarkable company, am I doing enough to prepare my company for the future? And you know, the reality of it is, while you tend not to think about it too often, there are going to be, and always have been, black swan moments that you couldn't possibly have imagined. And when those moments come, I really think business leadership comes down to a very simple but powerful question, which is, can you turn this in to a benefit, and can you lead your company towards that benefit, or do you just close your tent? And I literally think it's that simple. And I think we're seeing some remarkable examples of companies that are saying, hey, I may take a hit here for a quarter. I may take some revenue, degradation or whatever it's going to be, but I'm going to come through this by focusing on our users, our customers, our employees in ways that's going to make us actually a stronger and a better company. Now, I would argue, Bob, the attributes of the companies that are able to do what you and I are talking about are not just about the leaders. I think it's a little bit like being the quarterback of a football team. You either get way too much blame or way too much credit. Mm-hmm. I really think a lot of it is about the work those companies, the structures, their business models, that all the things that they've been doing through the years, that it's going to look like, oh, well, this pandemic basically, pushed everybody towards this type of company or that type of company. How much time has Zoom spent perfecting the technology you and I are using and coming up with, being one of the pioneers on a freemium model? Well, gee, they look like geniuses now. I don't remember too many people calling them geniuses several years ago when they were laboring under getting the thing off the ground, right? So I'm probably giving way too much around this, but I really think in the spirit of there will be winners and there will be losers, it does bespeak a scoreboard. But you know what? It is about that scoreboard. And I take, as do all of my peers, I take a tremendous responsibility that it's my job to bring together the talent of a company and serve customers and take that and be prepared for whatever happens into the future. And so I think those attributes are not just me, not just any leadership rah-rah speech I could ever give. I really think a lot of those are the decisions that we've made over the last several years. And then that's allowing us, and granted, look, I'm not denigrating the need for leadership, but I think at times like this, people overemphasize the dramatic speech and underemphasize, hey, what have you been doing the last 3 or 4 years? You ready for this? You up for this? Because a speech alone is not going to get it done. I wish it was, because man, it would make my job a lot easier.
Yeah, who's been quietly doing those 50, 60, 70 push-ups right? So that when the call for 100 comes out, all right.
Yeah.
I can do this, or come damn close to it along the way. Tony, you had mentioned something that you read recently from Mark Andreessen that you thought was, very timely.
Yeah, and Bob, I don't know if you've had a chance to spend any time with it. I think most of your listeners would know well who Mark Andreessen is. He was the creator of the modern browser at Netscape, and he went on to a successful career as a venture capital and an investor at Andreessen Horowitz. And he on occasion will write some, at times provocative, but I think very insightful posts. And one he wrote a few years ago got a lot of attention from people, called Software's Eating the World. And he really kind of was able to frame in a non-technical way some of the really remarkable things that we're seeing happening in the software world. And he wrote a post recently called "It's Time to Build." And the way I interpreted it was, he called out in a positive way that U.S. manufacturing has never had a higher output. And he's one of the few people that would actually know that. But I think he also said, we focus so much of our extraordinary talent and our extraordinary abilities around a very narrow set of offerings and things. And perhaps we've neglected things like infrastructure, and we've neglected some things that we could turn those same talents towards. And I really took it as a clarion call. I thought it was really kind of a cool post of not a political statement at all, but just a statement about an industry and a culture. And that, we want to make sure that, if we're not focused on building, and building is a company, building is what you do, building is what I do. I took it that way. It's not just building a building or infrastructure or roads, but I think that idea of really focusing on building something of value, and that perhaps maybe one of the outcomes that comes from this is we really, we think more profoundly about the work that we do and what we're building with that work, whether it's knowledge work or it's physical manufacturing, really doesn't matter. That's not the point. But are we building something, and are we contributing something? And I was really moved by the post.
Yeah, Tony, it's interesting as you mentioned that, and about building. A very good friend of mine here in Pittsburgh, he's a cell biologist, but his real love is information technology. So he created what's become, one of the world-class organizations doing this, called the Center for Biologic Imaging at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So his team is helping with some of the vaccine creation that's going on right there now at UPMC. And we were talking the other day, and he said, yeah, Pittsburgh was a great manufacturing hub. He said, we're going to start building, vaccines here. He said,
Yeah.
I'm getting into the manufacturing business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I think I just took it as a directional, I latched on to what I felt, what it meant to me, and it resonated where, coming out of the resource hub that we built, the business that every day we help people build their businesses through the use of our platforms and tools. And it felt to me, I think, for many of us, you labor away at a career, you labor away at a business, and you work along and you support your family and you do all the things that you do. But every once in a while, you wonder about whether the work that we do matters. Mm-hmm. And I think his post called that into question. And I know for the employees of Thomas, boy, I think if they ever wondered whether it mattered, they don't wonder anymore.
Yeah. Great proof point there. Tony, how do you keep the magic going, right? From what you and the team have done here, how do you keep that spirit going of, no, it's not months, it's days, it's not weeks, it's hours? Is that possible in this theory of what do we build next?
Well, it's a great question. And I think one of the things I've tried to do, Bob, and it's something I think about a lot, is being careful of running on pure adrenaline and emotion for too long. Mm-hmm. Because, as you and I both know from, various experiences in life, that wears off at some point in time, and you reach down for that as fuel and it's no longer there. And so I'm careful at this stage of my career. I know better, and I know how to do that better. But I also find that I try to pace myself to make sure that I, as a leader, but that also I encourage other people in the organization, focus on what you can control. These are really frightening times because the amount of information coming at you is overwhelming. It's also, most of it is contradictory, and it's a cacophony of data and contradictory messages coming at you. So I think what I try to do for myself and for the people in the organization is, hey, focus on what you can control. So kind of self-management, really takes a precedent there. The other thing is, we are literally, Bob, over the last 40 days, we have been going through different things that we've been doing. And we have been basically doing a write-up of what's been working, so that as we continue forward, we can be consciously competent about it. And I keep emphasizing to people, like the example of building the hub, or some of the new badging we developed, or there's a ton of other innovations going on. This wasn't magic. Lightning didn't strike. We weren't lucky, right? This is what, not only did we prepare to do it, but where you pushed yourself through whatever that barrier was, whether it was a cultural barrier, a learning barrier, technical issue, whatever it might be. Go back and think about it after and remember it, write it down. And so I think, again, two kind of pieces. One is self-management, I think, goes up at a time like this, the value of that, understanding how to take good care of yourself, both emotionally and physically at a time like this. I think the other thing is this idea of, hey, if you're doing some really cool things and it maybe feels like they're heroic, right? Heroic work doesn't scale, right? It can get you a breakthrough, but let's take the consciously competent components of this and break it down to say, well, here's what really happened here. Here's what we did. Now, maybe the idea was heroic, or the fact that we wouldn't sit on our laurels was heroic, but let's come up with changes perhaps to process, maybe organizational structure and other things. I'll give you a real simple example from this, Bob. Based on just timing of our roadmap, in the last 30 days, in addition to creating the coronavirus resource hub and all the other things that we talked about, we rolled out an all new badging system. We rolled out version 5.0 of ThomasNet. We rolled out a new business unit called Thomas Industrial Data. And oh, by the way, we rewired all of our financial systems and rolled out an entire new order entry system and reconfigured about 450 seats of Salesforce with a partner portal and a bunch of customized features to it. Now that was all in queue. That's probably 24 months of work. And literally the night before some of that stuff went live, we're all kind of looking at each other on a video call going, do we do this or do we not? We said, hey, we prepared for this. And so I think in some respects, that's also been really good, because it was like, hey, do what you say you were going to do. And let's not use this as an excuse. It would be very easy to say, oh, well, wait a second, this pandemic hit. Whoa, let's hold off. This is going to be really hard or confusing. And I don't think we took unnecessary risk. And it turned out to be absolutely the right set of decisions. So I think that's the third thing. So self-management, this idea of consciously competent, but I think also, make decisions. Don't get in. I think it's very easy at a time like this to fall into the trap of indecision. And as we all know, indecision is in and of itself a decision. And that doesn't mean, sometimes a decision is, no, we're not going to step forward on that right now, or we're not going to spend that, or we're not going to, take that step. But I think those three things have helped us. And at times, and you can hear me doing it right now, these are also self-reminders that, I think my job is to, at times, motivate, at times inspire, at times lead from the front. But if I haven't done my job on all the other pieces, that's just, it's not going to last. It's not really going to have an impact. It's not really going to, produce anything that at a time when we really need to be productive.
Tony, some wonderful thoughts there. Thank you. I was thinking about one of my heroes is Marie Curie, the chemist. And my favorite line from her is she says, "Chance favors the prepared mind." I'm sure some jealous colleague, you just happened to stumble. Yeah, it's funny. The harder she works, the luckier she gets. Isn't that how it goes? Well, Tony, thanks. Thanks for making the time here, sharing some great stories about your company, your outlook on things. And I, again, not being Pollyannish about it, I think there's a lot of room these days for some optimism and a sense of, for all the troubles everybody's going through these days, we're going to get through this, and it's going to be a pretty wild world, pretty interesting world, pretty high opportunity world as we get through this. So thanks for sharing some great anecdotes about that.
Hey, Bob, thank you. And I'll leave you with one to add, perhaps a little bit of trend data to your optimism. It's very clear in the data that we look at that there's a wholesale reevaluation of supply chains taking place, which is not a bad thing. We're also seeing an acceleration of the reshoring towards North American manufacturing. I think there are some great benefits that will come from this, and I think there's a resiliency that also cultural resiliency, and also I think we're learning. Boy, isn't it amazing the stuff we can do without needing to have big fancy offices and all these other things. I think there's a lot of things for future conversations, but I share your optimism, and I think certainly the data that we are able to look at with our window into the industrial economy would suggest that things are starting to lift, and we're starting to see sourcing and very tangible evidence that, you know, we're gonna have a little bit of turbulence here, but I think we're gonna get through this, and I think for many companies they're gonna come out of this stronger.
Yeah, Tony, it's wonderful. I see that happening. I hope for that to happen. And I think this sense of innovation and new ways of doing things for companies is great. Could I ask you before we go, can I ask you for a quick favor?
Sure.
This little guy over here, he was given to me when my daughter Ella was born about 31 years ago. And he suffered some degradation in his structure, right? And so he's sort of taken on this posture. And you talk about some of the suppliers and the things you've got. Do you know anybody where it can get sort of a rebuild for this guy?
Well, it may take me a little while, but let me source. I think what we should do is contact some 3D printers. And if you can give me the design specs on that bad boy,
oh, yeah.
I might have it prepared in time from when Ella's daughter is born, which won't be too far down the road, my friend.
No. 5 months or so. No, that's fantastic. Okay. So I'm not sure exactly how to get the design specs for this guy, but pretty special. I'll see what I can do, but don't hold up the rest of your business waiting, for me to get in here. Keep things humming, and Tony, keep up the sense of optimism. And maybe next time, can we open up with you down on the floor doing 100 push-ups?
I would be happy to. Now, bear in mind, it takes a little while. So, in any event, and it's not particularly pretty, but the productivity is there.
Oh, this is great, Tony. That we're going to get, I think, a record audience for that. That sounds good. Thank you, my friend, for insightful thoughts, good vision on things, and some wonderful philosophies about leadership and achievement, and what's possible when we sweep aside these notions of I can't do this or I can't do that.
Thanks, Bob. Always great to see you. Stay safe.
Thanks, Tony. You too. For all of you folks, thanks for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay generous. See you next time.